From Pacifica, this is Democracy Now!
I am absolutely confident that this is an example which our country and the whole world has seen, an example of a coup.
Ukraine is in a state of crisis as the country's democratically elected president is ousted following months of street protests that left at least 82 people dead. Then we'll talk about spying on journalists.
I'm sitting there in my home in Hertfordshire, and the left cursor started deleting my text remotely without my touching the keyboard, gobbling up the chapter that I was writing. And, you know, my first reaction was, what the and my second reaction was, hell, that's my book disappearing.
Guardian journalist Luke Harding says he was under surveillance and being followed while writing his new book, The Snowden Files, the inside story of the world's most wanted man. Was it the NSA, the GCHQ, a Russian hacker? All that and more coming up. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. Ukraine is in a state of crisis after the country's democratically elected president was ousted Saturday following months of street protests that left at least 82 people dead. The acting government has issued an arrest warrant for ousted President Viktor Yanukovych after he fled the capital, Kiev. Protests have centered on Yanukovych's decision to strengthen ties with Russia instead of Europe, a direction that acting President Alexander Turchinov said will now change.
The mission of the new government is to stop Ukraine from heading into an abyss, stabilize the exchange rate, guarantee the timely distribution of wages, pensions, and aid, return the trust of investors, help the development of businesses and the creation of jobs. Another priority is returning to the European integration course, the fight for which Maidan started with. We must return to the family of European countries.
The United States and Europe have both pledged aid to the new government in Ukraine. We'll have more on the crisis after headlines. Egypt's interim prime minister has announced the mass resignation of his government. The sudden resignation of the entire cabinet paves the way for Field Marshal Abdel Fattah al-Sisi to run for president after announcing his post as defense minister. Prime Minister Hazem el-Biblawi has reportedly been asked to remain in his post until a new prime minister is found. In Thailand, 4 people were killed and dozens wounded over the weekend in gun and bomb attacks at anti-government protests. 3 of the dead were children. Prime Minister Yingluck Shinawatra has condemned the attacks. In Venezuela, hundreds of thousands took to the streets for rival marches for and against President Nicolas Maduro. Maduro has accused his right-wing rivals of fomenting a coup with support from the United States, a claim the White House rejects. At least 10 people have died in the clashes. Mexican authorities have arrested the head of Mexico's largest drug cartel, Joaquin Guzman, nicknamed El Chapo. He was arrested in a condominium building in the resort town of Mazatlan. Guzman has been imprisoned before but escaped in 2001, reportedly using a laundry cart. Mexico's Attorney General, Jesus Murillo Caram, described how Guzman was previously able to elude capture.
This operation over the last month had very definitive moments that led to his arrest. Between the 13th and the 17th of February, several homes which he used were discovered, and in some of those homes, which is what complicated the arrest, we discovered that it was connected by several tunnels to 7 homes. Not only connected by several tunnels, but he always used the city's drainage system. The doors to the home where he was found were reinforced with lead, and that caused several minutes of delay in opening them, allowing for an escape through the tunnels.
The United States aided the investigation and will seek Guzman's extradition. Last month, the Mexican newspaper El Universal reported U.S. drug agents had previously held extensive secret negotiations with the Sinaloa cartel, reportedly agreeing not to interfere with its activities or to actively prosecute Chapo Guzman and other leaders in exchange for information about rival cartels. In Afghanistan, Taliban gunmen attacked an Afghan army base Sunday, killing 21 soldiers in the worst single assault on Afghan forces since 2010. The attack comes as President Obama considers how many U.S. troops to keep in Afghanistan beyond this year. The Washington Post reports numbers could range from 10,000 to 3,000 to 0. Afghan President Hamid Karzai has so far refused to sign a deal to maintain U.S. troops beyond 2014. Defense Secretary Chuck Hagel is set to release a plan today to scale back the U.S. Army to its smallest force since before World War II. Ahead of the plan's release Monday, unnamed officials told the New York Times the plan would protect funding for special operations and cyber warfare. The United Nations Security Council has adopted a resolution calling on both sides of the Syrian conflict to allow delivery of humanitarian aid. The resolution was supported by Russia and China, who vetoed past resolutions. UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon hailed its passage.
Profoundly shocking to me is that both sides are besieging civilians as a tactic of war. Some 200,000 people are under siege in government-controlled areas and 45,000 in opposition-controlled areas. More broadly, this resolution highlights again the urgent need to end the conflict.
On Sunday in Syria, Abu Khalid al-Suri, a rebel commander with close ties to the head of al-Qaeda, was killed in a suicide attack carried out by a rival group, the Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant. A Russian court has sentenced 7 people to prison terms ranging from 2.5 to 4 years for protesting President Vladimir Putin in the Bolotnaya Square in 2012. An 8th person received a suspended sentence. The defendants were found guilty Friday and sentenced today, the day after the closing ceremony of the Winter Olympics in Sochi, Russia. Pussy Riot members Nadia Tolokonikova and Maria Alyakhina were detained for protesting outside the court, along with more than 100 others. The video streaming site Netflix has agreed to pay Comcast for faster and more direct access to its subscribers. The deal comes just 10 days after Comcast agreed to buy Time Warner, merging the largest and second largest cable and broadband providers. The latest deal could have major implications for net neutrality, the principle of equal and open access to the Internet. Last week, federal regulators said they would not appeal a court decision striking down rules on net neutrality, instead saying they'll issue new rules, a proposal media reform advocates say is toothless under the current legal framework. Detroit's emergency manager has floated a proposal to slash worker pensions and retiree benefits in a bid to bring the city out of bankruptcy. Under a plan filed in federal bankruptcy court Friday, police and fire retirees would see their pensions cut 10%, while other retired city workers would see their pensions cut 34%. Uganda's president has signed a bill criminalizing homosexuality. The measure punishes repeated homosexual acts with terms of up to life in prison. U.S. evangelicals helped spur anti-LGBT fervor in Uganda, with some even reportedly helping to draft the new law. In Arizona, hundreds of people rallied outside the state capitol Friday to demand Governor Jan Brewer veto a bill they say legalizes discrimination against LGBT people. The bill, passed by both houses of the state legislature last week, would allow businesses to deny services to LGBT people if they cite religious beliefs. Protester Megan Abau condemned the bill.
It feels like it opens the door for discrimination in a huge, broad spectrum, the way the bill is written, that, I mean, I feel like we could be kicked out of a restaurant. I'm not shy about my activism in the LGBT community at all.
The Arizona bill is similar to ones that recently failed in Idaho and Kansas and to one under consideration in Utah. In Illinois, meanwhile, gay couples rushed to get married Friday after a federal judge ruled same-sex weddings could begin in Cook County, where a lawsuit was filed. A law legalizing same-sex marriage in all of Illinois takes effect in June. Basketball player Jason Collins, meanwhile, has signed a contract with the Brooklyn Nets, officially becoming the first openly gay player in the NBA. The contract is Collins' first since he came out last April. In Louisiana, a barge carrying crude oil collided with another vessel in the Mississippi River Saturday, shutting down a 65-mile stretch that includes the port of New Orleans. An oil sheen was seen on the surface of the river, but it's unclear how much oil was spilled. A new investigation has uncovered how failures by federal regulators to address safety concerns in Texas oil and gas fields have fueled unsafe conditions that have killed hundreds of workers. The Houston Chronicle reports 65 oil workers died in Texas in 2012 alone amidst a decades-long failure to implement safety procedures for the industry. The report found inspectors lack relevant training and do not have the authority to shut down oil and gas sites, even if they find life-threatening conditions. In other news from Texas, the CEO of Exxon Mobil has joined a lawsuit against a fracking-related project due to fears it could affect the value of his multi-million-dollar home. Exxon is the largest gas producer in the United States, relying heavily on fracking, which involves blasting water and chemicals deep into shale rock. But the Wall Street Journal reports CEO Rex Tillerson has joined a lawsuit to block a water tower in Bartonville, Texas, that would provide water for fracking on the grounds it would create a, quote, noise, nuisance, and traffic hazards. Residents of other fracked areas have complained about fracking's other impacts, including the poisoning of their water by toxic chemicals. President Obama is renewing his call for Congress to raise the minimum wage. Two recent polls show more than 70% of Americans support raising the minimum wage from $7.25 an hour to $10.10 an hour. Obama raised the issue in his weekly address on Saturday.
Right now, there's a bill before Congress that would boost America's minimum wage to $10.10 an hour. It's easy to remember, 10-10. That bill would lift wages for more than 16 million Americans without requiring a single dollar in new taxes or spending. But even though a majority of Democrats, independents, and Republicans across the country support raising the minimum wage, Republicans in Congress don't want to give it a vote.
Last week, the clothing retailer Gap announced it'll set a minimum wage of $10 an hour for its U.S. workers in 2015. In the latest mass shooting in the United States, a woman is accused of killing 4 people at a Native American tribal headquarters Thursday. The accused killer, Sherry Lash Rhodes, was a former tribal chairwoman who was the subject of a federal probe into missing funds. She allegedly opened fire at a hearing where tribal members were considering her eviction, killing 4 people, including her brother, nephew, and 19-year-old niece. And here in New York City, activists staged a protest outside the Guggenheim Museum Saturday night to draw attention to the plight of migrant workers building a new Guggenheim franchise in Abu Dhabi. The group Gulf Labor says migrants from South Asia labor in what is essentially indentured servitude. During the museum's Pay What You Wish hours on Saturday night, the activists lined multiple stories of the museum's spiral balconies, chanting and dropping banners with slogans like 1% Museum. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman.